Hey there, folks. So, I'm going to start off with a bit of an apology. I've not been incredibly active the last couple of weeks. I have unfortunately been laid out with the flu. I've only just started to feel good enough that I actually be able to get back to recording an episode. This is going to be a bit of a shorter episode, though, as you can probably tell from my voice. I am still a little under the weather. Now, with that out of the way, I wanted to take this opportunity to spend a bit of time going over just what are Unreal Engine modules and why I'm using them and why I've made such a big deal to the point I actually restarted my series to use them. So, firstly, what are modules? And specifically, what are Unreal Engine modules? For anyone who's familiar with other programming modules, they are different. So, as I've mentioned before, in simple terms, an Unreal Engine module is basically a plugin, but at a code level. That's a really bad description, but to quote Epic's own documentation and description on this, modules are the building blocks of Unreal Engine software architecture. You can organize your code into modules to create even more efficient, maintainable projects. And there's a bit of a repetition here, but modules are the basic building blocks of Unreal Engine software architecture. These encapsulate specific editor tools, runtime features, libraries, or other functionality in standalone units of code. All projects and plugins have their own primary module by default. However, you can define other modules outside of these to organize your code. Now, there's a key phrase there I want to circle back to. Standalone units of code. That's an important thing to keep in your brain about modules. Now, with that, why? Well, as it's mentioned in the documentation, everything has a module. My previous series, I had a single module for my project. And it was a one giant module. Everything was getting compiled together. There was circular dependencies, and even small changes I was making in certain files were causing pretty big rebuilds because there's a dependency in this header that caused another header to be, or a dependency on one header that caused another header that needed to be rebuilt, which subsequently had another one that it was dependent on. And it was getting really messy. Like, I was getting pretty long build times towards the end of the last series. Modules solve that issue by breaking things apart into, as I mentioned, standalone units of code. They're on their own. You could take a module from project A, move it over to project B, and at a code level, you could reuse the exact same functionality. Now, modules themselves, as already mentioned, are broken down into several different types. There are runtime modules, which contain code that is executed by the game itself or whatever you're doing. So that's like through play in editor, the code is getting executed, or if you do a build and you run the resultant executable file. There are editor modules, which are only used within the editor. I can't think of any examples for those off the top of my head, but say you decided to implement your own landscape system. I don't know. I'm not big on editor tweaks there. There's developer modules, which can be used for things like debugging and stuff like that. And there's third-party modules, which can be used to act as a wrapper around external libraries, networking. There's so many other possibilities there as well. An example is you could like take create a module that would integrate with MS SQL. Well, that was a module for your SQL database that in itself subsequently supported multiple different types of SQL database, like MySQL, Mongo, MS SQL. I'm picking really obscure, completely different ones, so don't worry about that. It's just a bad example. But anyways, these modules have their distinctions for a reason. And again, it's to keep things separate. You don't need or want something that you added to your editor, like custom terrain, to be custom terrain editing or importing or whatever it is, to be included in the resultant end game. Well, you might if you're doing mod support, editors, things like that, but that's beside the point. The modules themselves have that independent distinction for separation as well. So with that though, why would you want to create separate modules for your game logic? And by that I mean like your runtime modules. Why would you want to have that separated if ultimately it's all going to end back in the same runtime? Well, there's a couple of big reasons. The first one I've already mentioned a couple of times, but it is compile time. As your project grows, you add more and more features and functionality. If everything is in one module, like I had with the last series, and you make a change, there's a really good chance that's going to require a bunch of things to need to be recompiled. Yes, it can be mitigated to some degree by limiting the number of includes in a header file, making use of forward declarations and such. But at the same time, that can get cumbersome. And that can get pretty difficult to maintain, and it's still not perfect. Modules aren't perfect, but they're a better solution. Now, with multiple modules, only the code you're currently working on needs to be recompiled. So right now in my project, I only have technically 3 modules. I have the core module, the character module, and my core data module. But once I'm done working with the character module, and next episode's going to be working on the inventory module, I don't need to rebuild that character module until I make a change to it. So that doesn't need to be rebuilt every time. I want to like rebuild the editor, relaunch it with new code changes. Everything's just there. That's it. And that over the course of the project, it can save you hours in build times over the total lifetime of a project. Because you're sitting there and like I could take half an hour, 45 minutes. In some cases towards the end, it was up to an hour for a build with my last episode, like series. Running a modular setup, I can keep that down to like 5-minute build times. Ideally. Now, there's a second reason. Cleaner code. Modules enforce boundaries. It enforces distinct separation. I have my character module. I know this module covers nothing but my custom character classes. I'm going to have my inventory module. I know that covers nothing but my inventory logic. I don't need to worry about, does this contain logic for the UI aspect of the inventory. No, I'm going to have a module for that. That's the other thing. It's cleaner code. It keeps things separate. And it's actually restricting access unless you specifically provide it. Like I have to go in and say, I want my character module to know about the inventory module. So it can say, hey, I have an inventory component. Whereas with the old system, okay, it's a little adds extra steps having to do that. But with the old series, it was just a case of, oh, I can add an inventory component. I just have to add the header. Part of that then allows you to understand ownership and easily follow ownership of the subsystems and components. And the third one, and ultimately there isn't really much to say to this one because it's self-explanatory, but scalability. It allows you to grow and expand and add to without the risk of breaking other systems. Like that was one of the issues I had with the previous series is I was changing up my character system, which changed up my equipment system, which changed up and caused some things to break. And ultimately the whole point of modularizing your project is you don't have to worry about changes in system A breaking system B because system A doesn't have any direct impact to B. And then okay, I changed this module. This is now not working. I know it was that module. There's going to be other reasons to use modules as well. But honestly, those three, really the first two, are the biggest ones, at least in my eyes. Compile times, as a programmer, and anyone who's done any real programming for an extended period, compile times are the worst point in time. You're waiting. There's nothing you can do. Sometimes you can have a compile. Like I've had projects in the past that have taken hours to compile, and I wish I was joking. It would take 2 or 3 hours for a project to compile because of the monolithic size of the application, and it wouldn't fail until right at the end. So you'd have to wait 3 hours to find out if your build worked. Modules also help expedite that. Your build will fail a lot quicker. But now, if you want an example of modules, it's not that hard. Open up your project in your IDE and look at engine, UE5, source, and then, any of those, developer, editor, not really programs, but runtime. Open up project, engine, UE5, source, developer. In there, AI test suite, Android. So AI test suite is a module. Android, Android is a folder containing 5 other modules. But each of these is a module. They're pretty basic modules, but they're still modules. And that gives you an idea just how granular these can be. Like if you look at runtime, for example, you've got, where's a small example here? Foliage. That's not exactly small. Or eye tracker. There's a module purely for the eye tracker functionality. So right there's an example of some of the basic stuff, or the fundamentals. I don't want to say fundamentals, to give you an idea of how modules are used and like how granular they can be. Now, for anyone who's not overly familiar with modules, I understand this is a bit of a jump compared to what I was doing with the last series. And I understand that there is some potential for confusion. I haven't really shown much of my module layout, but on screen right now, this is a very rough module map of how I plan to have my modules formatted. Now, I'll start off with saying there is 3 on the left I have hidden because they are things I'm not 100% sure I want to include yet, and I don't want people getting excited. But these are the core modules for what I'm planning. Like, I've got the core system, the character system, the equip system, the stat line, AI, level load, and the lines point to dependencies. So for example, the character module is going to have a dependency on the core module. I've got that the wrong way around. The core module is going to have an included dependency of the character. I want to make sure I get that wording right. So core needs to know about character. Character needs to know about equip. It needs to know about inventory, and it needs to know about the AI. And it needs to know about the stat line. And it needs to know about the save interface. The item module needs to know about the equipment module, and it needs to know about my wording is getting messed up here. My brain is still not 100% following my nice little bout with flu, but you get the idea. So, and again, as I mentioned, there's ones on the side here. I've got them hidden because I don't want people getting excited yet. Now, for anyone who followed along with the original series, as I've mentioned, you will know I had a single module, effectively. I had the game. All the code was in one place. And yes, I had tried to create some separation with my folder structure, with my limited header includes, but it had still ended up as one giant blob of code, effectively. And it was the compile times and the bugs that were coming about in different sections that were the driving factor for me to realize I had not approached the code in the right way. And before it did become this huge monolithic mess, bigger than it already was, I needed to take that step back and use the modular approach. Because one of the nice things there is I write an inventory module. I don't like that inventory module. Instead of how I did in the previous one where it's like, TF inventory, TF new inventory. For actor components, I can just have a module TF inventory or a module TF inventory new, but the class or component class inside could still be TF inventory. And as long as the function names remain the same, I can have whatever logic I want between the two. And I could mix and match between the modules. I could I want to use this module. Okay, it's not working. Let's try this other module. I could have multiple modules for that same thing. So, but anyways, I'm getting a little sidetracked here. And as you can probably tell, my voice is starting to go. So, again, I do want to apologize. This is a bit of a shorter episode. It is a filler episode. I do apologize. This one is just something I needed to get out for both the sake of I wanted to explain myself a little better on the module front, explain what they were and why. I also didn't have any real time to get a full episode recorded with the planning that I need to do. So I'm hoping now I'm on the tail end of the flu that I'm going to be able to get work done and like my preliminary work done for my inventory. And that will be the next episode. It's coming out will be on an inventory module. At least the first episode. This is probably going to be a 2 or 3 episode part. So, as always though, folks, thank you for watching. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe, all that normal YouTuber jazz that you need to throw out there these days, I found. But, as always, folks, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.